Paul Brunton's Travels in India, Part 2, Meeting Ramana Maharshi. In the early 1930s, the acclaimed writer Paul Brunton was one of the first Westerners granted an interview with His Holiness Shankaracharya, the spiritual head of South India, wherein he was advised to visit Sri Ramana Maharshi at the ashram on Arunachala in Tiruvannamalai in South India in the hopes of having an audience with the Maharishi. The following are some highlights from his account of that visit from A Search in Secret India, the chapter entitled The Hill of the Holy Beacon. As I enter, a pin-drop silence prevails throughout the long hall. The sage remains perfectly still, motionless, quite undisturbed at our arrival. There is something in this man which holds my attention as steel filings are held by a magnet. After 2 hours, I become aware of a silent, resistless change which is taking place within my mind. One by one, the questions which I have prepared in the train with such meticulous accuracy drop away. I know only that a steady river of quietness seems to be flowing near me, that a great peace is penetrating the inner reaches of my being, and that my thought-tortured brain is beginning to arrive at some rest. I perceive with sudden clarity that the intellect creates its own problems and then makes itself miserable trying to solve them. I feel that the chains of mind-made problems are being broken and thrown away. I begin to speak. Master, I have studied our Western philosophies and sciences, lived and worked among the people of our crowded cities, tasted their pleasures, and allowed myself to be caught up into their ambitions. Yet I have also gone into solitary places and wandered there amid the loneliness of deep thought. I have questioned the sages of the West. Now I have turned my face towards the East. I seek more light. Is there anything beyond man's material existence? If so, how can I realize it for myself? 10 minutes pass in silence. At last his lips open and he says gently, "You say I. I want to know. Tell me, who is that I?" Bewilderment creeps across my brain. An idea suddenly flashes into my head. I point a finger toward myself and mention my name. But that is only your body. Again I ask, who are you? Know first that I, and then you shall know the truth. Through deep reflection on the nature of one's self, and through constant meditation, the light can be found. The next day in the hall, the assembled company squats in rows around the hall, but among them there is no noise and no talk. Upon the corner couch sits the Maharishi, his feet folded beneath him, his hands resting unconcernedly upon his knees. His figure strikes me anew as being simple, modest, yet withal it is dignified and impressive. His head is nobly poised, like the head of some Homeric sage. His eyes gaze immovably towards the far end of the hall. That strange steadiness of sight is as puzzling as ever. Has he been merely watching through the window the last ray of light fade out of the sky? Or is he so wrapped in some dreamlike abstraction as to see naught of this material world at all? The usual cloud of incense floats among the wooden rafters of the roof. I settle down and try to fix my eyes on the Maharshi, but after a while feel a delicate urge to close them. It is not long before I fall into a half-sleep, lulled by the intangible peace which, in the sage's proximity, begins to penetrate me more deeply. Ultimately, there comes a gap in my consciousness, and then I experience a vivid dream. It seems that I have become a little boy of 5, but now he is a great towering figure at my side, for he seems to have grown to giant size. He leads me away from the hermitage and, despite the impenetrable darkness of the night, guides me along the path which we both slowly walk together. The Maharshi turns and looks down into my face. I, in turn, gaze expectantly up at him. I become aware of a mysterious change taking place with great rapidity in my heart and mind. The old motives which have lured me on begin to desert me. The urgent desires, the dislikes, misunderstandings, coldnesses, and selfishness which have marked my dealings with many of my fellows collapse into the abyss of nothingness. An untellable peace falls upon me, and I know now that there is nothing further that I shall ask from life. When you go back into the world, you shall have this peace which you now feel, but its price will be that you shall henceforth cast aside the idea that you are this body or this brain. When this peace will flow into you, then you shall have to forget your own self, for you will have turned your life over to that. And the Maharshi places one end of a thread of silver light in my hand. I awaken from that extraordinarily vivid dream with a sense of its penetrating sublimity yet upon me. Immediately, the Maharshi's eyes meet mine. His face is now turned in my direction, and he is looking fixedly into my eyes. That condition of lofty indifference to self and profound pity for my fellows, which I have dreamt into being, does not take its departure, even though I am now awake. Several days later, I am granted an interview. I enter the hall and sit down near the Maharshi's divan. The Maharshi turns his face immediately, his mouth relaxing into a pleasant greeting. Straight away I feel at ease and begin to question him. The yogis say that one must renounce this world and go off into secluded jungles or mountains if one wishes to find truth. Such things can hardly be done in the West. Our lives are so different. Do you agree with the yogis? The life of action need not be renounced. If you will meditate for an hour or two every day, you can then carry on with your duties. If you meditate in the right manner, then the current of mind induced will continue to flow even in the midst of your work. As you go on, you will find that your attitude towards people, events, and objects will gradually change. Your actions will tend to follow your meditations of their own accord. A person who is advancing will begin to enjoy the deeper beatitude, whether they are at work or not. While their hands are in society, they keep their head cool in solitude. You have to ask yourself the question, who am I? This investigation will lead in the end to the discovery of something within you which is behind the mind. Solve that great problem, and you will solve all other problems thereby. There is a pause as I try to digest his answer. The Maharshi addresses me again. All human beings are ever wanting happiness untainted with sorrow. They want to grasp a happiness which will not come to an end. The human search for happiness is an unconscious search for the true self. The true self is imperishable. Therefore, when we find it, we find a happiness which does not come to an end. I ask, what exactly is this self of which you speak? If what you say is true, then there must be another self in man. His lips curve in a smile for a moment. Can a man be possessed of two identities, two selves? He answers, to understand this matter, it is first necessary for a man to analyze himself. Because it has long been his habit to think as others think, he has never faced his I in the true manner. He has not a correct picture of himself. He has too long identified himself with the body and the brain. Therefore, I tell you to pursue this inquiry. Who am I? He pauses to let these words soak into me. I listen eagerly to his next sentences. You ask me to describe this true self to you. What can be said? It is that out of which the sense of the personal I arises, and into which it shall have to disappear. Disappear? I echo back. How can one lose the feeling of one's personality? The first and foremost of all thoughts, the primeval thought in the mind of every man, is the thought I. It is only after the birth of this thought that any other thoughts can arise at all. If you could mentally follow the I thread until it leads you back to its source, you would discover that, just as it is the first thought to appear, so it is the last to disappear. It is possible to go inwards until the last thought, I, gradually vanishes. He will attain that consciousness which is immortal, and he will become truly wise when he has awakened to his true self, which is the real nature of man. When a person knows their true self for the first time, something else arises from the depths of their being and takes possession of them. That something is behind the mind. It is infinite, divine, eternal. Some people call it the kingdom of heaven. Still others call it the soul. Others name it nirvana, and we Hindus call it liberation. You may give it what name you wish. When this happens, a person has not really lost themselves, rather, they have found themselves. The Maharishi bends down to light a fresh joss stick, which will replace one whose red spark is dying out. The realization of truth is the same for both Indians and Europeans. Admittedly, the way to it may be harder for those who are engrossed in worldly life, but even then, one can and must conquer. The current induced during meditation can be kept up by habit, by practicing to do so. Then one can perform his work and activities in that very current itself. There will be no break. Thus, too, there will be no difference between meditation and external activities. If you meditate on this question, who am I? If you begin to perceive that neither the body nor the brain nor the desires are really you, then the very attitude of inquiry will eventually draw the answer to you out of the depths of your own being. It will come to you of its own accord as a deep realization. Again, I ponder his words. Know the real self, he continues, and then the truth will shine forth within your heart like sunshine. The mind will become untroubled, and real happiness will flood it, for happiness and the true self are identical. You will have no more doubts once you attain this self-awareness. He turns his head and fixes his gaze at the far end of the hall. I know then that he has reached his conversational limit. On my last day at the ashram, when dusk falls, I return to the hall. The Maharshi's eyes, always shining, steadily become more glazed and fixed. His body sets into a rigid pose. His head trembles slightly and then comes to rest. A few more minutes, and I can plainly see that he has re-entered the trance-like condition in which he was when I first met him. A hush falls upon the little company. The minutes slowly pass, but the silence only deepens. The hall is becoming pervaded with a subtle, intangible, and indefinable power which affects me deeply. I feel, without doubt and without hesitation, that the center of this mysterious power is no other than the Maharshi himself. Strange sensations begin to arise in me. Those lustrous orbs seem to be peering into the inmost recesses of my soul. His mysterious glance penetrates my thoughts, my emotions, and my desires. I am helpless before it. I feel that he has perceived pages that belong to a past which I have forgotten. I become aware that he is definitely linking my own mind with his, that he is provoking my heart into that state of starry calm which he seems perpetually to enjoy. In this extraordinary peace, I find a sense of exultation and lightness. Time seems to stand still. My heart is released from its burden of care. Never again, I feel, shall the bitterness of anger and the melancholy of unsatisfied desire afflict me. Hitherto, everyone in the hall has been hushed to a death-like stillness. At length, someone quietly rises and passes out. He is followed by another, and then another, until all have gone. I am alone with a Maharishi. Never before has this happened. His eyes narrow down to pinpoints, like the stopping down in the focus of a camera lens. There comes a tremendous increase in the intense gleam which shines between the lids, now almost closed. Suddenly, my body seems to disappear, and we are both out in space. No word passes from him to me. Some time later, I collect my faculties, look at the clock, and rise quietly. The hour of departure has arrived. I bow my head in farewell. The sage silently acknowledges the gesture. I utter a few words of thanks. Again, he silently nods his head. I linger reluctantly at the threshold. Once more I raise my hands, palms touching, and so we part. Please visit us at www.pbarchives.org and also at www.paulbrunton.org. Paul Brunton's books are available at www.larsonpublications.com.